And we are live. So let's get into my segment for the Expert Council podcast today. If you're watching this on YouTube, this is just one 15-minute-ish piece of a full podcast of over an hour featuring a lot of really great experts on a huge variety of topics. I also am streaming both on the Survival Podcast YouTube channel and the Bitcoin Breakout with this, even though this is not a Bitcoin segment at all. But it certainly applies to Bitcoin if you view Bitcoin as hard money. That's pretty much all I'm going to say about Bitcoin today, other than when I quote the individual that asked the question. We're going to talk about the food supply today. And this is due to an episode I did this week with Texas Slim. And it encouraged this individual to start thinking and to think about something else at a book called The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean. And this is a piece of the email he sent to me. He said, after reading the Bitcoin Standard, I'm really wondering if there is a link between losing our hard money, hence our time preference, and the pivot to mass-produced shit food. Indeed, there is. There is a huge link. And I wanted to do this little segment today, and I probably need to do a full show on the history of all this, because if you're concerned about your health, it's important to know why you're eating garbage. And many people don't understand that they're eating garbage. And they don't understand that they're eating garbage because they don't know how we got the garbage. So they can't figure out that the food is the problem. And fiat caused this problem in a way. It more accurately enabled the problem. So if we have really dry woods and we go out in those really dry woods and we start pitching matches back in the woods, there's a pretty good chance we'll start a forest fire, but the match may burn out. It may not hit a dry enough spot. The fire is not really caused by the woods, but in the end, it is the woods that burn. Okay. But if we were to go out in dry woods, like in a drought like we are now, and be complete assholes and dump a couple gallons of gas on the ground and pitch a match on that, there'd be a massive forest fire, and we probably belong buried in a hole for what we have done. But the gas didn't really cause the fire, because the gas itself burned out. It was the fuel that ignited the fire that then led to a chain reaction of releasing stored energy. That's what a fire is. People say, I heard Michael Saylor say one time, fire is a battery. Fire is not a battery. Fire is the energy released from a battery. If you put flame in the air with no fuel, it extinguishes itself. A lump of wood, brush, is a battery of energy that is released by the flame. And gas would enable a faster release. For something that was already in motion to happen much more quickly, that's why they refer to it as an accelerant. So that's the way to think of fiat in the story I'm about to tell you. It was an enabling accelerant to a process that was already on the way. So we have to go back to the 1900s, the early 1900s, and understand how food was being produced. Then we have to understand how, even though Roosevelt was a socialist, not everything he did was necessarily bad. And not everything that came out of what they did with ag during that time was bad. It probably wasn't optimal, but it wasn't all bad. And then the transition that was made in the 70s under the direction of the Nixon administration, a gentleman named Earl Butz, and how that's been carried forward. So in the early 1900s, a farmer would get a piece of land and think, this is money. And we had the most fertile land in the known world in the Midwest United States. And then they started to get these farming implements, mechanized plows and stuff like that. And they pretty much farmed every inch of the ground that they could farm. Then we got a drought right in the middle of the Great Depression. It led to what we call the Dust Bowl. It also led to incredible surges in production, which then created a collapse of the price of food. So all the grains and stuff, all the stuff that they were plowing and planting, since everybody did so well, they had this huge surplus, and then the market price would crash. There's too much. And then during droughts, there would be too little and prices would surge. So the farmers that could still produce during a drought produced even harder than before because they were going to get a lot of money. So they farmed even harder, which made the drought worse and made the Dust Bowl worse. So the Roosevelt administration, and you can read a lot of this stuff. I've got an article here I'm going to refer to a few times. I'll pull up on the screen right here on Grist, where you can verify everything that I'm telling you right now, and I'll come back to that in just a bit. But we go from there to a point where the Roosevelt administration realizes that we have to do something about this oversupply, undersupply issue. So what they say is, we'll tell you basically how much to plant. If there's some extra that we can't sell into the market that starts pushing the price too low, we'll buy it from you. When we need you to leave some land rest, we'll pay you not to plant it. And that way we won't overproduce. And if there ends up being a bad season, we'll take the grain reserves and we'll release them to stabilize the market. And we're already paying you not to produce that year somewhere or someplace, so it'll all work out. Was it a perfect solution? No, but it was better than what they had before, and it's better than what we have now, which is basically a larger version of what we had before. So coming up into the 70s, Nixon takes over, and this is all viewed as socialism, which in some ways it most certainly is, but that doesn't mean the solution is to go crazy with it. But you can't tell this to the Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Butz. And what he does is say, we need to grow as much as we can, as hard as we can, as fast as we can, all the time. And the farmers were a little bit leery about this. They weren't so sure about this idea in the beginning, because many of them at the time, if they're older farmers, they were around for all the crap that happened pre-war. Right? So if you were a 25-year-old farm kid working on the farm for your dad, if you made it back through World War II, if you got drafted or whatever, right now you're an old man, but you're still around. And so farms back then were very much held in families. And so the older men were telling the younger kids, like, I don't think we need to do this. But Butz was a good salesman, and he said, you don't have to worry about this. What we're going to do, we're going to open up international markets. If there's any surplus, we'll sell that shit overseas. And eventually he said things like the one quote I want to read to you here from this article on Grist. With grain reserve hollowed out and drought impending in the 1973 harvest. So that's what happened. They went crazy in production, and then they sold a whole bunch of grain to the Soviet Union. If guys like me remember the 70s, there was a whole big thing. Like, if we can't keep getting grain to the Soviet Union, could cause a war because they were going to starve without us. Okay. But grain prices jumped and farmers scrambled to plant as much as they could to take advantage of it. What does that sound like? It sound like the 1920s? Okay. And then Butz fanned their frenzy. He said the following: plant fence row to fence row. He extorted from his bully puppet. In other words, plow up and plant every bit of land you can. Get your tractor on. He booked no dissent and said, get big or get out. He routinely thundered that. That was something he said, it wasn't a single time. If you've ever heard that quote before, that was said, it was said many times. Now, I'm not going to read from this article, but I do want to put it up on the screen for you, and there will be a link to it in the show notes so you can read it yourself if you want to. This is the secret history of why soda companies switched from sugar to high fructose corn syrup. And I'm going to refer to this a bit, but I'm not going to read it. It is on Mother Jones, not my favorite publication, but it is accurate. It does come from their side and their agenda, but it is accurate as to the details of what went on. But this is one of those things where you kind of have to start connecting multiple pieces and ends together. And if you don't, it's really hard to understand everything that happened. So while this is going on, while these farmers are being told to plant from fence row to fence row, and everybody's being told it's about grain for the Soviet Union, because as long as we're feeding them, we won't have a nuclear war, because they can't afford a nuclear war because we're feeding them, right? It's not about grain. It's about corn and soy. The entire United States market is being pushed in the direction of corn and soy. And this is also being capitalized on by companies like Ocean Spray. And the first man that ever got a big corporation to switch from sugar to high fructose corn syrup, I can't remember his name, but it was in the early mid 70s. He worked for Ocean Spray. And the first year that they fully switched over, his company made so much more money that he went out to Montana and bought a massive ranch with just his bonus and paid cash for it. That's how much money this dude made just by making this switch. So everybody, when they hear that, they think, well, it's just cheaper to make high fructose corn syrup than it is cane sugar. Well, it's not. Whoa, wait a minute. How's that work? Okay. And they said, oh, I know it's subsidies. Oh, we'll get to the subsidies. But it's not just the subsidies. So about all this time's going on, Mr. Butts, he doesn't go to Washington. Well, he kind of does. He's already there. But he goes to the international sugar markets. And he says, there's too much sugar coming into this country. It's driving down the price. And the poor sugarcane farmers in South Florida can't make a living. We need to do something about this. So, of course, farmers in Nebraska and all growing corn and soy and wheat don't give two shits. Doesn't bother them one way or the other. So they got nothing to say about it. So there's no opposition. Dudes down in Florida cutting down and draining the Everglades grow sugarcane. They're all about this. So they go out and they increase tariffs on imported global sugar supplies so that sugar coming into the United States costs more than sugar produced in the United States by a factor of 2. And then all of a sudden sugar is expensive, even though it's not, because we were paying 2 times for sugar in the United States what most other developed countries are paying for sugar. Because believe it or not, it's easier to get sugar out of sugar cane than to get a modified, chemically altered, processed sugar out of corn. And I'm not saying one's, the cane sugar is good. I'm just telling you what happened because it plays into more than just how much sugar a person's eating directly. It's also indirectly. So then there's this huge push to grow corn. And then the government comes in and subsidizes crops like corn and soy. So then it becomes super cheap. Now, this was all done by design. The growing middle class needed to be fed. And, well, we can't feed all these guys on steak. We need cheap shit to put in boxes that's shelf stable that we can feed them. So then we had this glut of sugar and beans, basically. And so it ends up going into everything that you eat. Well, the soda companies look at companies like Ocean Spray with their juices and go, if it works for them, it'll probably work for us too. And they switch over to high fructose corn syrup. And they end up not just with a different type of sugar and a worse form of sugar for our livers, because fructose is a liver toxin in the way that alcohol is a liver toxin. It just doesn't make you drunk, which makes it worse because you'll consume more of it. So if you really want to destroy your liver, get yourself some orange juice and some vodka and make some screwdrivers, and you're well on the way to cirrhosis. Well, so we have all this stuff in our food. Now, here's the other thing that happens. Up until all this shit happens, the idea that you were going to take a cow and feed it for 6 to 8 weeks at the end of its life and stuff it with corn would have made sense. Anybody raising cattle anywhere in the United States, that would have been nothing at all that any rancher would have ever thought about doing. But all of a sudden, corn is cheap and soy is cheap and it's abundant and it makes cows fat. Now, I talked about this with Texas Slim this week. If you took a cow from the time it was weaned from its mama and started feeding it the shit they feed them in CAFOs, it wouldn't grow up. It would die. It literally cannot grow and live on the food we finish it on. When you start feeding that animal that way at the end of its life, you are transitioning it into the point of where I want to do as much as I can to increase the weight before I kill it. And if I don't kill it with a bolt in its head, if I keep feeding it that way, it's going to die. So we largely didn't have what we call CAFOs today for the beef industry prior to the 1970s and all this happening. You see how it all plays together. And then there's such a glut, but at the same time, it drops the prices of everything going into the 1980s. And what happens then? Well, first, all the people that caused all the shit to happen go, oh, sorry about your luck. And all the farmers that took out all those massive loans. And here's where the fiat comes in. The fiat was available in buckets. So they went to the farmers with buckets of money and said, here, cheap loans, easy, plant fence row to fence row. It'll be great. Until it wasn't. Until the glut got so big with ag and prices went so low and interest rates soared past 18%. And then what happened? The equivalent of BlackRock today bought up and consumed all the farms and made them into giant super farms. And then to solve their problem, they convinced us, you know what would be a great idea? Let's take this corn that we're already killing you with, and let's make it into ethanol. And what do all the big giant farm conglomerates that now exist out in Nebraska and Kansas, et cetera, say? Whoopee! That's another place to sell our shit. Plow more. Without fiat to subsidize this, the loans, the other side of the food equation, if you had to have honest money during this period, none of this could have happened as quickly as it did. Farmhouses that families grew up in for 7 and 8 generations were burned to the ground and plowed out of the way so that the corn could go there too. We didn't have these fields that you can't even see the other end of on a flat surface in the 1960s. There had been a farmhouse somewhere here and there. There were patchworks of them all over the place. Most people were farming anywhere between 80 and 1,000 acres, depending on who they were and what they were doing. Now farms are routinely 40, 50, 100,000 acres, and not one house on them. Not one person lives there. And then we're destroying the soil. And if you want to know if a society is going to fall apart from a health standpoint, look at the health of their soil. The health of our soil is dog shit. Actually, dog shit would be better for our soil than what we're putting on it. And dog shit's probably not the best fertilizer to be using as a manure. And this is why our food supply is crap. This is why what you're eating is crap. This is why, even though I'd rather you eat feedlot beef than soy and corn in a box, feedlot beef is also crap. Because you're eating an animal that ate crap, and hence you're eating crap. A cow is a ruminant. It is a grazing ruminant. It is supposed to eat forbs and herbs and grasses. That's what it's supposed to eat. And when it does, it is incredibly healthy. If you get a cow past being a young calf and you have good pasture, you almost don't have to worry about anything as a rancher after that. That animal's going to thrive. That animal's going to thrive. If you have a browsing ruminant, then they eat browse and herbs and forbs. That is your sheeps and your goats and your deers and your elks. That's what these animals are supposed to eat. And when you eat an animal that's eating what it's supposed to eat, you're eating the kind of food you're supposed to eat. And if you're eating something that was grown in inert, dead, mineral deficient soil, and let's be clear about it, it's not really mineral deficient. Since we've destroyed the life in the soil, the plant can't get to the minerals that are actually there. There's minerals in all this soil. We can fix all this with regenerative farming and rotational grazing and savanna mimic systems and infiltration of water systems like key line plowing, key line swale design, conventional swale. Like all this stuff works, but all the places it needs to be done are being plowed fence row to fence row to grow mostly corn and soy today. And that is how fiat destroyed our food supply. And that's why if you go Google pictures of people on the beach in the 1970s and 80s. And then go look at pictures of people on the beach today. People on the beach in the 1970s and 80s, it wasn't like everybody was posing like, all you fatties, get out of here. It's not like we had no fatty signs on the beaches. Go look at pictures from the 1970s anywhere. Look at pictures of kids in the 70s and 80s and the 60s. They were kids. They ate candy. What changed? The entire food supply shifted over time, and it did so in such a way that not only was the food lower quality, so that we had to eat more because we felt hungry because we were nutrient deficient. You have to think about that. So back in the 20s, doctors would prescribe for children with mineral deficiency. They tell a mother, just give them a teaspoon or so of sorghum syrup in water every day. And of course, kid drank it right down with sugar. And it worked. Why? Because sorghum was a very efficient dynamic accumulator of nutrient. Sorghum syrup today, jack shit for nutrient because it doesn't have any nutrient. All they got is NPK because that's what we put on there. But take away fiat. Take away the ability to subsidize both sides of the crop. Take away the ability to easily manipulate global markets. Take away the ability to just hand out loans to farmers until they're bankrupt. Take away the ability to then give all the money that they wanted with no consequences for failure to pay because you just give them more money to the giant conglomerates. Take away fiat and the ability to convince people that it actually makes sense to put more energy into producing a gallon of ethanol than you get out of the ethanol. You can't do that without fiat, can you? You can't spend more money to make a gallon of ethanol than you can sell the ethanol for unless you can have subsidies, and you can't have subsidies the way we do without fiat. So yes, and there's more. And maybe I should do a whole show on this. But that's it for today. I'm not going to hang out and chat here in the live feed. Thank you guys for tuning in. Remember, the podcast itself will go out about an hour from now. And we have a lot of really great people worth hearing from today. You can always find my podcast at thesurvivalpodcast.com and the stuff that is Bitcoin specific at thebitcoinbreakout.com. Take care, guys.